Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Nope. So, for me, this movie immediately reminds me of Deathbed, the bed that eats, or it reminds me of Killer Sofa, which actually is a recliner, but it is what it is anyways. So, what I'm kind of getting here by saying that is the main focus upon this movie is just a alien craft that comes, or UFO, that is to come in onto planet Earth and just consume things and eat things and digest things. And so eventually we go on to have this alien spacecraft suck things up into this kind of whirlwind of things to eventually collect things like horses or humans and eventually consume them. And that's about all that it needs to go on and do until they figure out a way to beat it. This movie is almost the equivalent of Tremors if Tremors was way less exciting. Um, this movie is a slow slog of a film. Really, when looking at this, really, Jordan Peele, like, bravo, dear sir, because of course, we can have a director that just puts out anything and it'll probably become a big, huge, massive hit, and then people will be like, what the was this movie? To me, this smidgingly reminds me of, like, Super 8, but even that feels to give this movie a little bit too much praise. But like it kind of has that feel of trying to go on and figure out how you can get a clip of this UFO to go on and try to find other people that are professionals that can go on and try to obtain footage of this thing to eventually try to get money off of this and so on and so forth. So yeah, so with that said, what can I say in the teeing up thing that won't give me anything left to say when we get into spoilers? Here's what I can say. We have a character named OJ, who is to go on here, and he, of course, is to be this horse wrangler that goes on and is involved in movies and shows and maybe photo shoots. Who knows exactly what's going on in the very beginning of this film, because we're not marinating on this part long enough to really know what exactly this spot really was. And so we go on to have OJ, who then is to slowly but surely realize that there is to possibly be in his future no way for him to go on and keep his ranch, because the previous person to have gone on and been the real rancher, of course, had died for reasons that I'll explain in spoilers. So OJ eventually is to go on one night upon his ranch and eventually look up into the sky and notice that there is this weird cloud that is moving unusually like any of the other clouds within the night, and that all of a sudden has him worried. And so all of a sudden they start to decide that they need to go on and eventually try to get a camera upon this thing to understand what it is, and then eventually go on and try to film this so they can get this this unique one-of-a-kind moment to try and sell it on places like Oprah or something like that. Like a big, massive show that they can fork over a huge amount of cash to be able to get clips of this thing. So we also have a guy named Ricky Jupe Park, who a lot of people know as Steven Yeun from either the Invincible animated cartoon, or eventually The Walking Dead will be like a big thing that everyone will probably know him from. but I believe he was in a movie also called like Mayhem, which actually was pretty good. Um, it was kind of like a Belko experiment kind of movie. Like both of these things kind of came out at the exact same time, and they were like the exact same movie. But anyways, so Ricky, it seems, is also to have this amusement park of sorts, Jupiter's Claim, and he eventually is to also go on and try to make money off of this visual, and things end up going horribly awry. And so within this movie tends to waste a lot of time, even to the point of one scene we have two characters just going on and playing VR, which we're not actually seeing what they're doing, like what they're playing. We're just kind of seeing them kind of going on and doing VR stuff, and we're like, okay, what was the point of that whole scene? Nothing? Okay, great. More wasting of time? Thanks, editor and whoever decided to just put these clips together. Probably the director. Anyways, if we could just have this movie have edited down to like half its time and really give us the more important scenes, that would be great. Because really, there is so much time, like, just taken with these slow scenery shots or these wide shots, and I'm just like, wow, what a massive nope. This movie to me just kind of feels like a joke. It does. Um, but like, hey, they they pushed this as much as they could push it. It seemed this movie seemed appealing to a lot of people, and man, what a mistake that this movie eventually be when a wider audience is to eventually go on and see it, possibly via streaming service. To just like, what the is this? Because eventually, I'm sure a lot of people won't go on and uh, make their way to go into a theater to all see this movie. But like, I'd be lying if I wouldn't say that, like, look at a number of other movies that honestly weren't that great, and a ton of people spent money on them and said they were great, and I didn't quite understand it. So Nope may also be that case. So anyways, that's how I feel. This movie's awful. It's like almost unwatchable. That's just like, I'm like, I seriously have to waste my time on watching this for 2 hours? I'm sorry, Jordan Peele. I like your stuff, but like, I liked Key and Peele. I'd watch that all the time. That was hilarious. That was funny. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Us. I enjoyed Get Out. But when it just comes to this movie, it's just not what I ever thought it would be. But also, I didn't pay my money to see this movie either. I went on to eventually watch a bootleg version of this film, and so I got to watch it for absolutely free. So, I'm going to tell you now exactly where you can go on and watch this movie for absolutely free. So let's go on to that. So hopefully you can go into a Google search, or you can also go into a Google Play Store and honestly find the equivalent of a number of certain apps that I'm naming here. I don't remember any of the actual names of certain apps that you could probably go on and use. Um, there may be certain ones that end up saying my yes movie, or eventually there is to be like 1 2 3 movies that are to be equivalent to some of these apps that are currently on the Google Play Store for however long. But eventually there is an equivalent of this app somewhere in a Google Play Store, so go ahead and check it out. So let's go on. So the first one is C Movies app, letter C Movies app. You can hopefully go on and be able to download this app and find out that it is going through a renaming phase, that eventually you'll have to go on and download Yes Movies. And eventually you'll, of course, go on to find a ton of movies for absolutely free, as well as shows that you would have to forcibly go onto a certain app to be able to pay a certain amount of money per month to have to go on and see. Next up will be Fox HD Movies. Regardless of what I say next, this may help or hinder you eventually find this app through a Google search. You can go on to find that the title of this app, because the logo says Fox HD Movies, the title of the app says Play 1080p HD Movies. Hopefully you'll be able to find any number of these apps that I'm recommending to you right now. If not, then eventually there's always an app equivalent that hopefully you can find and download. And then lastly, you can go on to going on to a Google search to search the words TV Crush. To eventually go on and find out that TV Crush has changed its name and logo to HD Movies 123 Movies. It'll have a logo that says HD Movies with the King Crown off the side. You can go on, download that app, and be able to go on and see a number of movies for free. Not quite sure that it's Nope quite yet. That is to be upon there. But eventually, again, you'll go on and see a number of movies for absolutely free. So that's the whole goal here. So you could also go onto a Google Play Store and go and find 123 Movies, like I had said. But yeah, so let's just go on and get into spoilers so I can kind of quickly wrap this one up. If I end up finishing this review in the next 10 minutes, I wouldn't be surprised, because this movie is very thin. Very thin. So many shots are just taken up with just scenery shots and like just the build of this film, and that's all that really matters. So with that said, let's go on to that double five bad boy, because it's about that time. Just go on to spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the time we get to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this film, we of course have Otis Hayward Sr., who is played by Keith David. Love Keith David. Of course, They Live and the Pitch Black Chronicles of Riddick movies, and also knowing him as the voice of Spawn, always great. So Keith David, of course, is Otis Haywood Sr., is to eventually have this horse on this ranch, and all of a sudden OJ is to be walking through this farm and is all of a sudden noticing a bunch of items falling out of the sky, pelting around this ranch. And we then go on to, of course, have Otis, who is hit by an item that is to knock him down, and possibly is to be lodged maybe into his brain, to where it seems that Otis at one point is rattling off things like $5 for some reason, and eventually Otis does die here. Come to find out, we find that some plane had crashed, and the debris of this airplane had fell to Earth, and there had been things like wedding rings being lodged into a horse and so on and so forth, to eventually showcase what had happened, I guess, bizarrely. So that weirdly starts off this film, and I'm like, okay, that's bizarre. So we turn around and have OJ, who is to be with this horse, to go on to this shoot. So we have OJ that is to go on to, I'm assuming, this film, hence why you would have a green screen, and you would have this this actress, who of course is to supposedly be Bonnie Clayton. We also had the girl Barbie, who plays Nessie in this movie, who was in Euphoria. I'm like, oh, I saw Euphoria as long as I could stand watching it. And, like, no offense to Barbie, I liked her in that show, even though stuff started to get weird after a while. Anyways, pushing on. So, OJ goes on to eventually have an accident happen on set because this horse is to end up getting spooked, and this horse eventually goes on to kick certain things of makeup, and we see this massive thing of powder that ends up getting pelted upon this actress. And so they're ending up turning around and telling OJ here, it's like, well, yeah, like tough break, but you know what? Like we're gonna call it a day for you. So we have OJ that goes on to eventually meet up with Emerald, who is actually his sister. And so Emerald is to go on and tell everybody like the long history of certain people going on to be guys who were to manage horses, and that they've had a long history of that. But then eventually, once Emerald is go on and see that whole stretch of line, OJ then goes on to eventually have them lose this job. So OJ and Emerald are to, of course, eventually make their way back to the barn. And so within one night of OJ needing to go on and feed the horses, because horses need to be fed or managed or whatever. So at some point OJ is to go outside to eventually see this cloud, and we also have Emerald who is to go on and eventually see this cloud also. So we then go on and have OJ and Emerald who are to go into this kind of tech store to eventually find the best possible camera that they can go on to get to record this thing. But also we come to find out that this alien spacecraft is to also knock out electricity, is to knock out power. So like that's the kind of interesting thing about this story. So we have a guy named Angel Torres who is telling both OJ and Emerald that they're going to have a problem installing these cameras that they want to put up on their place, and that Angel will be glad to want to go on and install it because these guys will have no clue on how to do this. But eventually OJ is saying like, well, I think I can install it, and Angel's like, no, you won't. So Angel goes on to install this equipment, and when he starts going on and putting out all of these things from off of his van, we then weirdly have Angel, who is to all of a sudden scream for some bizarre reason that just seems out of character and it's bizarre. But then Angel all of a sudden mentions that his girlfriend broke up with him, and like he starts rattling off all this stuff about his girlfriend like we give a So sorry, Angel, we just don't. You're just the tech guy that eventually is to be not the main character, just a character that I guess is to be comic relief, question mark? Because what else is he good for? So I didn't find this guy funny whatsoever, sadly enough. So we are to go on and have OJ, who is talking to Emerald and saying like, yeah, we're going to get this big massive payday from this whole video. And so what ends up happening is they end up doing this, like putting all these cameras up. And what ends up happening is if one camera is to go down, there's going to be another camera that is to be consistently up no matter what. So it seems what happens is we go on to again have this cloud supposedly appear, and the one camera that is still up has a bug over it that is to consistently just hover over the camera, to where even Angel is watching the feed himself, and he's getting ticked off that this bug is to, of course, be on the camera. And Angel just gets so upset that he's telling Emerald to try and knock the bug off of this camera so he can see what the feed is. So eventually Emerald is go on and knock off this bug, and we have Angel, who is watching this feed while I guess this store is supposedly closed, and Nessie here is to consistently watch over Angel, to eventually be eating chips and just be like, hey, what you doing, kind of thing, this kind of character that's just in the background. And so that's what Barbie ends up doing here from Euphoria. So what eventually the camera idea that they had does not work. They didn't get any real footage here. So we go on to have, of course, OJ, and we have Emerald, that at this point are to eventually try and call this documenter kind of filmmaker guy called Antlers Holst. Antlers Holst. Goofy name. And eventually he becomes a bigger part of this movie, so I have to go on and say his name consistently. Holst. Let's go with that. So, because I know I'm probably going to butcher Antlers. So, that is what it is. So, we go on to eventually having OJ, and we have Emerald, that are to try to tell this guy that they're filming some reality documentary, and Holst is to go on and say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I think we should probably go on and it just feels like Emerald and OJ are to probably not have enough money to really pay this guy at all. So it's like they're kind of putting a scheme, or they're possibly thinking maybe if they can get this guy lured here to eventually find out what's really going on, that eventually he'll be more interested, and eventually he does, because we'll get there. So OJ is to now have to go on and sell one of his horses, so he ends up going on to Jupiter's Claim. And so this, of course, is some Wild West amusement park that is to be held by Ricky Jupe Park, who we come to find out had prior success as a child in a show that, of course, ends up going horribly awry within one episode. Hence the very beginning of this movie, where we have this chimpanzee that is going on and making his way through the set, and it doesn't make sense. And that's the reason why I want to go on and explain that whole beginning right now. So we have OJ that is to bring this horse to Ricky. I think his name is Luck. And OJ ends up going on to sell this horse to Ricky. And then when OJ and Emerald are to make their way to meet up with Ricky, Emerald is consistently to say that she knows Ricky because she remembers the show that he was in. And Emerald is going to need an explanation of what had happened to that show that he was on. And so Ricky is to go on and explain that at some point there was a chimpanzee called Gordy that eventually went wild on the set. And Ricky explains it like this, that there of course was an SNL skit, Saturday Night Live skit, where eventually there were a number of actors who all played the certain roles, and that Ricky was to go on and say that everything that happened in that Saturday Night Live skit was the exact same thing that happened on the actual show. And so Ricky is to go on and explain that for any time that any of the actors were to reference or to remind Gordy about the jungle, that Gordy all of a sudden went wild and eventually started to tear through people and start to kill them. And so Ricky at one point is to get a flashback of the set that he was on where everyone was getting killed. And so we go on to have Gordy, who is tearing apart some woman, and then is to eventually find the father, and then it's to chase after him and tear him apart. And then eventually, when Gordy finally sees Ricky, who is hovering underneath this table, we have a moment where Gordy goes on and tries to do this fist bump, and then Gordy is to be shot and taken and killed and taken down here. And so, oddly enough, we have Ricky, who is to have a whole trophy room of that show, as if it is some kind of shrine to this show. Because I guess after that moment, that had gone like viral, and that had been like this huge news story and so on and so forth, to where Ricky is to try to keep and have a bunch of mementos from that moment, I guess. So that's just freaking wild. So we go on and we tell Ricky this whole story about Gordy and going wild, and so I guess that's Ricky's claim to fame, bizarrely. So we also, it seems, have Ricky, who's to have another deal on the table for OJ, and eventually Emerald is going to find out what that deal is when they are eventually driving back to the ranch at some point, to go on and find out that OJ was going to go on and sell the ranch, and because it feels like business as far as what's going on with what OJ is doing is not going well. So we still have to get to the whole alien thing, so let's get to that. So we go on to eventually make it to Jupiter's Claim, where we now have to understand what the heck Jupiter's Claim is going on and doing with this horse. So if we don't have Angel and OJ that are to see that this cloud isn't moving compared to all the other clouds, and that they technically have proof that an alien spacecraft exists in the sky, but there isn't a real, like, they need to see whatever this is. They need to, like, a real true anybody with kind of editing software can go on and come up with that kind of thing. So the real proof is we push on to have Jupiter's Claim going on and putting up this show. So we have Ricky that is to go on and have one of his co-stars from the show that is basically missing a good portion of their face, but at least they're still alive. So we go on to have Ricky that is to explain to this audience that they have known in the past that they are not exactly alone in the world, but now there is to be definitive proof. So Ricky is to go on and try to release this horse to eventually have this alien spacecraft come down and eventually not go on to just consume this horse, but consume everybody in this amusement park as well with it. So we go on to have OJ that is to also make his way to Jupiter's Claim to eventually find it seemingly deserted. To the point where OJ is to go on and see this spacecraft and almost get sucked into it, but luckily he is somehow to be able to go into this vehicle to try to avoid being able to get sucked into this ship. So we also get to see this UFO going on and digesting people. We start to see them getting pushed around, which I guess is to look like a throat or a butthole to some people. Um, and so we go on to eventually see people getting consumed by this ship and killed. Then I think there's also a moment where the ship basically sprays out blood as if it's basically like peeing out what it like did not want to keep. Um, it's basically crapping out what it didn't want. So what it couldn't digest. And then eventually there is an item that ends up crashing onto OJ's windshield. So eventually we have OJ, who of course is to see this thing. And so Antlers is to now, after this whole thing has happened, Antlers is to want to get involved in filming this alien spacecraft. And he's going to go on and do whatever he needs to, have equipment of whatever he needs to go on and want to eventually shoot this footage of this ship. So we even have a point to where Antlers is to, of course, have this camera that doesn't run on electricity. And because eventually at some point, once this ship gets closer and closer and closer, eventually we'll have a problem with electricity. So we have at one point where OJ and Emerald are driving through, seeing this car dealership with these inflatable tube men that we end up having to jokingly remember the Family Guy episode where the guy is to try to sell these wacky waving arm inflatable tube men. And desperately trying to sell them because he has a whole dormitorium or whatever it is of all of these wacky waving inflatable armed tube men and whatever. And so we have OJ and we have Emerald going and stealing all of these inflatable tube men to eventually present them around this ranch. And they're going on to hope that they can kind of trick this alien to come down so they can somehow get a shot of it, get footage of it, or try to go on and kill this thing somehow or another. So what ends up happening is we have at first this master plan that there is to be this car battery that is to soup up all these inflatable tube men, to have them consistently be battering back and forth, hoping that the ship will probably get attracted by that. But not only that, when eventually we go on to have Antlers try and start to film this thing and consistently use this whole roll up and need to get a reload, we have Emerald that all of a sudden stumbles upon this random guy who is wielding this electrical motorcycle, and Emerald is to eventually ask this guy what he's doing there, and it seems that he is some paparazzi, he is some TMZ kind of guy, and so he's going on and having this camera and this camera recorder like kind of connected together, and eventually asking Emerald for her story because he's going to make her famous. So we go on to, of course, have this this TMZ, this guy who is on this motorcycle, drive on to eventually stumble upon a field that is to cut off his motorcycle and have him go flying, because, of course, we get to a point here where the guys have put together this reverse magnetism like thing that is going to shut off of course this guy's motorcycle immediately. So this guy ends up going flying, and so OJ has to go on and save this guy. And so while we go on and do that, we have a number of people that are going to start have to like try and run away from um, this ship as it's coming for them. We have at one point where Emerald tries to go back into the house to have the alien spacecraft try to suck up the house. Emerald tries to run back out of the house to almost get like grabbed by this thing. We go on, we have Antlers, who is to go on and take his camera because he knows what this thing wants. And so Antlers is trying to lure the ship out to eventually try and take a shot of this to show maybe the digestion and everything that he can possibly can before his camera ends up dropping, and we of course have Antlers get killed here. So Antlers sacrifices himself for the sake of film. Good for him. So we of course have Angel, who ties himself up with this tarp and barbed wire, because that's all I guess he had with him, to eventually try and keep himself from being eaten by this alien spacecraft. So we go on to have at some point where Emerald is starting to realize that OJ may be at risk here, and it seems that OJ is trying to eventually lure this thing out, and so we have a point where they're kind of going on and doing this and whatever between Emerald and between OJ, whatever that meant. So we go on to have Emerald, who is to take this electric motorcycle and make her way back to the Jupiter's Claim. OJ, I believe, we end up seeing him again, so OJ is not dead. So we go on to have now Emerald, who's supposed to be like the person who is to really go on and do something here. So Emerald is to go on to be in the Jupiter's Claim, and now we start to see that this ship is changing its shape to much more become what it looks like to be, like almost like a more balloon like, more like air hot, or like a kind of more balloon kind of ship than it was like more like a UFO kind of saucer kind of thing. So it changes its shape and it becomes much more larger because there's smaller pieces that are starting to stretch out here. So we then go off to have Emerald, who her master plan is to eventually let loose this big massive helium balloon that is to be of the Jupiter's claimed mascot, and then go on and try to take a picture of this thing by having this like certain like weird looking picture contraption that ends up like putting out these big massive Polaroids. And so Emerald is to try to wind this thing up so that way she can go on and continue to take pictures of this thing to have proof it exists. So eventually this spacecraft that is more balloon-like now is to eventually go on and try to consume this helium balloon. And when this alien spacecraft tries to consume this thing, all of a sudden we have this helium balloon that goes on to eventually explode within this ship, killing this thing off. And then Emerald is like, yeah, like of course the cliche-ish like yeah, we beat it kind of thing. And then Emerald goes all the way back to the ranch to go on and see OJ, and the movie ends like there isn't any end credit scenes. The only thing that we really get from this movie is to go on and go to the Universal Studios to go and see the Jupiter's Claim and have a tour of that, so you can somehow be involved in a movie that honestly isn't that good. But Universal Studios needs some kind of set piece to eventually have a thing out of, so that's what they're going to go on and do. Just a money making scheme for Universal Studios to just go on and have some set piece that they probably randomly made to just add into a movie somehow, and that's what they did, it seems. But, anyways, with that said, I think that's all for Nope. This movie was very easy for me to go on and just split out because a lot of it just really, there was like not a lot going on within this film. We also had the one moment where Angel, OJ, and Emerald were to all go in to this kind of this restaurant together and start eating this meal. And OJ again is talking about the alien spacecraft, and so they're going on of like, man, not right now. And OJ's like, what? And Angel's like, hey man, read the room. Like nobody wants to go on and talk about this thing right now. And OJ's like, oh, okay, all right. But he was just trying to figure things out. And so like eventually like Angel, OJ, and Emerald in some part of the movie leaves the ranch to just go back to Angel's place for OJ to watch both Angel and Emerald to be playing VR and just kind of relaxing because of all the craziness that they had to go on and deal with an alien spacecraft within their ranch. So other than that, I think everything else is covered with this one. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I did forget, because I'm sure that there will be. Let me know how you felt about Nope, because eventually you would probably want to go on and not see this film. Or eventually some people may have gone on to a theater and see this movie and be like, no, I thought this movie was great, because I know that always happens. Eventually, if there's a movie I hate, there's all of a sudden a movie that people go on and thoroughly enjoy and love for whatever reason. So with that said, because eventually there's movies that exist that I'm like, man, this movie was stupid. And people think that that's like the best movie they've ever seen, because that's just how the world works for certain taste buds and whatever. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.